You stand in the corridors of Greenwich Palace, and the air clings to you like damp velvet. The perfume is overwhelming: roses and civet, musk and decay. A scent so thick it feels alive, as if beauty itself were rotting from the inside out. You hear laughter from the Queen's chamber beyond the door, but it sounds faint, distant, as though filtered through centuries of dust and denial. If you love uncovering the hidden lives of history's icons, the myths polished to gold and the grime beneath them, make sure to leave a like and tell me where you're watching from. It's incredible that from Cairo to California, from Lahore to London, we can stand together across time and space, peering into the same flickering candlelight that once illuminated these forgotten halls. In the summer of 1588, when England braced itself for the Spanish Armada, Queen Elizabeth III's court was already fighting a quieter, stranger enemy: the stench of its own civilization. The palace at Greenwich, magnificent from afar, was inside a world of rotting rushes, unwashed linen, and air so thick with perfume it stung the eyes. The courtiers powdered their wigs, doused their sleeves with rosewater, and sprinkled lavender on their floors, not for luxury, but for survival. To breathe in that palace without fainting was an act of endurance. Water was the enemy. Physicians warned that bathing opened the pores and allowed pestilence to creep inside the flesh. Even the Queen herself believed that washing too often weakened the spirit. "I bathe once a month," she reportedly said early in her reign, and if need be, once more. By later years, that month had stretched to 3. In an age when disease was invisible and death always near, the simple act of stepping into a tub was an act of rebellion against nature itself. When Elizabeth did bathe, the ritual was magnificent and terrifying. Servants dragged a copper tub into her private chambers, the metal polished until it shone like firelight. Buckets of river water, drawn from the Thames and boiled to steaming, were poured in by sweating footmen. The Queen's ladies tested the temperature with linen-wrapped hands before she entered, modestly wrapped in cloths that hid her body even in solitude. She would lower herself slowly, the steam rising around her like incense at a funeral, the water already brown before the ceremony was done. The soap was a crude mixture of animal fat, ash, and lye. Its scent was sharp, caustic, more punishment than purification. When rubbed into the skin, it left the body raw and red, like a penitent scourged for sin. The Queen's women whispered prayers as they washed her hair, brittle from lead paint and powders, afraid that too much water might dissolve the fragile crown of beauty England adored. Outside, London stank of tanneries, open drains, and plague pits. The Thames was a moving graveyard of waste and animal carcasses. People carried pomanders, little silver balls filled with spices, pressed to their noses whenever they walked through the streets. The rich masked the air, the poor endured it. And yet, for all its filth, Elizabeth's court believed itself the height of refinement. Perfume became their armor. Every morning, the Queen's attendants prepared her chamber like a shrine. Bowls of rose petals soaked in wine stood beside her mirror. Vials of civet, a musk scraped from the glands of exotic cats, waited to be brushed behind her ears. The mixture of animal musk and sweet perfume created a scent that could fill a hall. Courtiers called it divine. Ambassadors called it suffocating. One French envoy confessed in a private letter that he held a pomander to the nostrils lest the air offend the lungs. He meant no insult. It was simply survival. Perfume was more than vanity. It was control. To smell of flowers rather than sweat was to proclaim distance from the mortal world. Elizabeth's body, painted white, perfumed to excess, had become an emblem of divinity. The Virgin Queen, untouchable, unblemished, unsullied. Her courtiers took their cue from her, dousing themselves until the air of the palace itself seemed perfumed with ambition. The stench of mortality was to be denied at all costs. But denial breeds ghosts. As the years passed, the scent that followed Elizabeth became a legend of its own. Servants could tell when she was near long before she entered a room. The fragrance, equal parts rose, musk, and metal, lingered even after she left, clinging to tapestries, hangings, and breath itself. It was as though the palace itself had begun to sweat her presence, the way walls absorb years of smoke and sorrow. Even in her private prayers, she could not escape it. Chroniclers described her kneeling before her altar, eyes shut, surrounded by the smell of incense, oils, and the faint reek of her own unwashed flesh. She prayed for purity, for strength, for the illusion to hold. The woman who could command armies and outwit empires feared above all the slow betrayal of her own body. "Cleanliness," wrote one Elizabethan doctor, "draws out humors and invites death." Perhaps he was right in a way. The queen who dared to wash might indeed have risked her life, not from disease, but from the collapse of the image that kept her alive. For in Elizabeth's world, power was painted, perfumed, and performed. To peel back the mask would be to reveal that beneath the lilies and lace, England's glory was just flesh. Mortal, sweating, decaying flesh. The courtiers continued their rituals, brushing scented powders into carpets, lighting braziers of myrrh, sprinkling wine on the rushes to hide the smell of waste. And through it all, the queen's legend only grew more radiant, her body a vessel of contradiction. Adored, yet feared, fragrant, yet foul, divine, yet undeniably human. When she stepped onto the balcony to rally her troops against the Spanish Armada, wind caught her hair, and for a fleeting instant, the scent of musk and rosewater drifted over the crowd. They called it the perfume of victory. But history would remember it differently, as the fragrance of denial, the perfume of a grave not yet filled. In that moment, the Virgin Queen seemed immortal, yet the air around her already carried the faintest trace of what was to come, the sweet, metallic scent of flesh that has forgotten how to breathe. The morning light at Richmond Palace slants through a veil of gauze, turning the air itself pale. The Queen sits before her mirror, an object so small, so intimate, that it might be mistaken for a confessor. Around her, the chamber hums with the quiet panic of attendants, the rustle of gowns, the scrape of silver trays, the faint hiss as a jar of white paste is opened. The smell is sharp, vinegar, chalk, and something metallic, like rain striking lead. Elizabeth Tudor, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, her image has been painted so many times that the truth of her face has vanished beneath centuries of myth. But here, in this fragile dawn, we see the process of transformation that kept her divine. The alabaster glow that dazzled Europe did not come from youth or grace. It came from poison. Every morning, her ladies prepared a mixture of cerus, white lead ground with vinegar, and spread it across her skin with trembling fingers. It was heavy, sticky, and cold, drying into a mask that cracked if she smiled too widely. Beneath it, her real skin burned and flaked, raw from the constant suffocation. Physicians knew of the danger but dared not speak it aloud. To warn a queen against her beauty was treason against the order of the realm. Her Majesty's complexion must remain unspotted, one court physician murmured, his voice half prayer, half warning, for the realm sees in her face its own peace. And so the ritual continued, layer upon layer, year after year, until her pores closed like sealed tombs. The paint ate into her flesh, and the sickness it bred she hid beneath still more paint. When the sores came, small, oozing wounds along her jaw and temples, her ladies mixed the same white paste with crushed pearls to disguise them. In portraits, she looked eternal. In truth, she was decaying. To touch the queen's face became an act of sacrilege. Courtiers bowed instead, eyes lowered, pretending not to see the faint dust of powder flaking from her cheeks as she turned her head. Beneath the chandeliers, her visage gleamed like marble, beautiful, still, and utterly inhuman. The poets called her the moon among stars. They did not know how close the comparison was, for like the moon, Elizabeth's light was only reflection, cold, borrowed, lifeless. The poison did not stop at her skin. In those years, sugar was the currency of power, a rare treasure imported from colonies across the sea. To eat it was to display dominion. Elizabeth adored it. Her banquets glittered with candied fruit, sugar castles, and sculpted marzipan. But the sweetness was a slow undoing. The queen's teeth, once strong and white, began to blacken and crumble. Courtiers whispered of it behind gloved hands. Her breath grew sour, her smile tighter. And yet, as with the paint, she turned her ruin into majesty. When an ambassador once remarked upon her darkened teeth, she smiled and said, "It is the fashion of my court, sir. You will find my ladies equally adorned." That, too, was power, to turn decay into trend, to make corruption appear divine. The courtiers followed eagerly, painting their faces pale and dusting their hair with powder until the entire court gleamed like ghosts. In their imitation, England itself learned the lesson, that beauty and deception were twin pillars of authority. Painters immortalized her this way, not as a woman, but as an emblem. In the Ditchley portrait, Elizabeth stands upon a globe, her gown radiating like sunlight, her face white and smooth as a death mask. The storms that rage behind her symbolize nations, her calmness, divine order. But look closer, and the calm is suffocating. There is no blood in those cheeks, no breath behind the eyes. It is not a portrait of life, but of control, a beauty so absolute it erases the human beneath. Her courtiers learned to adore the illusion. They called her their fair Vestal, their glorious phoenix, rising pure from the ashes of England's chaos. Yet in private, her closest attendants saw what others did not. They saw the stained rags, the crusted jars, the swelling at her temples where the lead had begun to burrow into her skin. They saw her teeth ache so badly that she could scarcely chew. They heard her mutter prayers through lips that bled. "Bring the mirror closer," she would say, her voice rasping. "I will not have my people see weakness." It was not vanity alone. It was survival. Elizabeth had ruled for decades in a world that refused to forgive the sight of a woman aging. Her beauty was her armor, her mask, her crown. Every morning she remade herself into the vision her subjects required, untouchable, untouched, eternal. And in doing so, she destroyed herself slowly, gracefully, publicly. There is something almost liturgical in that destruction. The act of painting her face became a form of worship, to the nation, to power, to the lie of perfection. The ladies who served her wept in silence, yet none dared stop the ritual. To remove the mask was to reveal mortality, and mortality was the one thing a queen could never show. Outside her palace, London's streets echoed with the shouts of merchants selling sugar, the very substance that ate her smile. Inside, the scent of vinegar and roses filled her chambers, masking the faint tang of metal and rot. The mirror reflected a monarch transformed, not by divinity, but by endurance. The more the poison claimed her, the more the world adored her image. When night fell, the queen dismissed her attendants and sat alone before the mirror, watching the candlelight tremble across her painted skin. Beneath the white mask, her veins throbbed faintly blue. She reached out, touched the glass, and whispered to her reflection, "So long as they see the goddess, I shall remain the queen." But the goddess was cracking. Beneath the powder, the flesh was breaking apart, and beneath the beauty, the woman who once laughed in sunlight was already vanishing. By morning, she would be painted anew, her mask restored, her smile rehearsed. Yet, if you listened closely in that pale chamber, you could almost hear it, the faint, brittle sound of lead dust settling, like snow falling softly on a grave not yet claimed. The winter of 1602 hung over Richmond Palace like a funeral pall. The Thames outside was frozen stiff, a dull mirror for a dying world. Inside, the once glorious court of Queen Elizabeth I had grown quiet and airless, thick with the mingled scents of incense, perfume, and slow decay. Courtiers no longer approached their queen, they endured her. She sat slumped in her gilded chair, her spine rigid out of habit rather than strength. Her face, once painted in shining white, had turned to a cracked mask of powder and sores. Beneath the lead and vinegar, her skin festered. Her gums had blackened, her teeth rotted to stumps. The fragrance that had once heralded majesty now clung to her like warning smoke. Roses, ambergris, and the faint metallic sting of infection. Yet she insisted the rituals continue. Each dawn, her trembling ladies prepared the same tools of transformation, the white paste, the rouge, the perfumes. They worked in silence, trying not to gag as they dabbed the mixture over weeping skin. "Do not pity me," the queen once murmured. "Only the living decay. The divine endures." The words sounded more like a prayer than a boast. Her body was failing, but her will remained iron. She refused her bed, choosing instead to sit upright through the long, bitter nights. "If I lie down," she told her counselors, "I shall never rise again." For days she stood or paced the floor, her thin slippers whispering against the cold stone. When exhaustion finally forced her into her chair, she sat unmoving, her eyes open, fixed on something only she could see. The courtiers whispered among themselves, choking on the scent of death. Incense burned constantly, coiling through the room in pale ribbons. Servants sprinkled rosewater on the rushes until the floors gleamed wet. Still the smell of rot pushed through, sweet and heavy. One ambassador described it privately. "Her Majesty's presence is overpowering. Her very air corrupts the breath." Yet no one dared retreat. The queen was still the sun, even as her light flickered. When Robert Cecil begged her to rest, she turned on him with hollow fury. "Think you England can sleep while I wake?" she rasped. "My breath holds her crown aloft." She clutched her chest, gasping, and then composed herself, forcing her trembling hand to stillness. The courtiers bowed lower. No one mentioned the trembling again. Her attendants began burning spices, cinnamon, cloves, frankincense, to mask the odor. The room filled with smoke until even the tapestries seemed to sigh beneath the weight of it. From the courtyard below, guards claimed to smell it drifting through open windows. The scent of roses tangled with something darker. At night, Elizabeth dismissed her attendants and walked alone. Barefoot, she crossed the freezing floor, her white gown trailing behind like a shroud. She would stand before the window, staring out over the black river. "Do they still cheer my name?" she whispered once, her reflection fractured by frost. "Or do they wait for another dawn?" No one answered. Even the palace seemed to hold its breath. Food disgusted her. Sleep refused her. The music and laughter that once filled her chambers had long since faded. Those who served her moved like shadows. When one maid wept at the sight of her sores, Elizabeth raised a trembling hand. "Do not cry, child. We are all dying, only I must die beautifully." Her obsession with beauty endured even as her flesh betrayed her. A new gown was brought, pale silk embroidered with silver stars. It shimmered like moonlight when she insisted on wearing it, though the weight nearly pulled her down. "A queen must die adorned," she said, "so they may remember the light, not the darkness that follows." By March, her speech had grown faint. She could no longer bear mirrors, yet demanded her chamber smell of roses. The priests who came to pray found the air unbearable, thick as honey. Still she refused confession. "I am not yet dust," she murmured. "I will not speak as if I were." When the end came, it was quiet. The queen sat upright in her chair, her body wrapped in the silver gown, her hands resting on the arms as though still holding her scepter. The last candle burned low, its smoke joining the haze of incense. Her ladies stood at a distance, weeping softly, too afraid to touch her. For hours she did not move. Then, with a sigh like air escaping from a tomb, her head bowed. The virgin queen was gone. But the perfume lingered. It clung to the curtains, the rushes, the very stones, that strange mingling of roses and rot. When dawn broke, the courtiers opened the doors, gasping at the cold air rushing in. Outside, the river thawed. Inside, the legend hardened. Gloriana was dead, but her myth, pale, perfumed, unyielding, would never decay.